Welcome to Slayerfest 98. I'm Ian Carlos Crawford.
I'm Mae Schultz.
I'm Meredith Goldstein.
And I'm Trevor Carlee. And we're going to cover Season 1, Episode 2 of The Magicians, Source of Magic.
Yay. It's the second episode. We're here. Trevor, I feel like, Trevor and Meredith especially, I feel like the two of you, I've been talking about covering this show fucking forever.
Yeah,
waiting with anticipation.
When? I tried to bully Trevor into being an Angel co-host, and he was like, no, I have my Buffy podcast. And then I was like, well, what about when I do Magicians? And that Trevor was like, yes, absolutely.
Yes, 100%. I will find time.
So, Trevor, do you want to start everyone off with your Magician's origin story?
Sure, yeah. I can't remember the reason I watched. So I had watched the first scene of Magicians and bailed on the show completely. And I can't remember why I had watched it. If I'd seen it, if Netflix recommended it or if someone had. But the first scene did not hook me at all. Like, it just completely...
Like Dean and What's-Her-Face meeting in the park?
Yeah, just sitting on the bench. It just felt very stagey. Like, it just felt... for some reason, it didn't connect with me at all. And I was like, oh, whatever, this isn't a... And not even in a negative way. I was just like, whatever, this isn't working for me. And then a friend was like obsessed. It was the same friend that got me into Doctor Who. She was like, you have to watch The Magicians. You were going to love it as a Buffy fan. And she showed me the talking and code scene between Margot and Elliot. And I was like, all right. And I watched the first episode and then I just like binge watched until I caught up to the live. And I've since rewatched it with my wife. And it's one of my favorites now.
Yeah. I mean, we talk about it all the time. Meredith, what's your Magician's origin? I feel like I know, but I'm like, do I remember what it is?
It's very similar. So I had a friend who was really into the book and then the show, and I resisted. And then I read a few things about the show. I tried to watch the show. I gave up. And then years later, it was just this momentum of people loving it more and more and more. And this friend, I should name her, Sarah Faith Alterman. Thank you for being bossy about this. I went back and I watched it all so quickly that I'm really excited. I was hoping you'd go through this show because, when you binge something as opposed to watching it the way I did Buffy, like back in the olden days, there are all these like moments you miss and things. So I consumed it the way one consumed shows during lockdown, like long before lockdown, where I was like that. It became my personality for quite a bit of time.
I remember I remember us like talking about it a lot. Like I was very excited. Mae, I don't know what your Magician's origin, so Mae was one of our, like, we just recorded together for Buffy, so I just heard Mae's Buffy origin last time we recorded it, and now I'm hearing your Magician's origin.
Yeah. So I had known about the Magicians from the time it started airing. And I don't know if it was a friend. Someone was like, oh, it's like raunchy on the Sci-Fi Channel. You should check it out. And I was like, that's not really a selling point for me. It wasn't at the time because I was operating under the guise that I was kind of prude. And that was definitely coming from my ex-wife. But there was... I want to say there were 2 seasons out when I finally was like, okay, I'm going to watch this. I'm going to check it out on Netflix. And we were going through a really rough period, my ex-wife and I. And so I started watching it just like really late at night after she would go to bed. And despite how dark and upsetting some parts of it are, it became like a comfort show for me. And I had to take a break at a certain point, which I'm not going to say what did it, but something that happens with Julia.
Yes.
That episode broke me, and I was like, I need a break. And I didn't come back to it until 2 years later. And it's really fun watching it again now because I remember so little of the first season.
Yes.
So little of the first season, especially that first scene. I was like, wait, what? What? This happens right at the beginning of the show? So it's really exciting. And I watched episode 1 by myself in bed the other night. And then I watched 2 through 4 with my friend Thea last night, who's the only other person I know in real life who loves the Magicians. She even gave me a dress, which I wish I was wearing right now, but it's in my dirty laundry. It's that like black and white patterned dress that Alice wears later on the show. And I love that I have a dress that's the same dress that Alice wore.
So someone when my mother passed away, a friend who had a magician's podcast called Physical Kids Weekly, they were covering it as it was coming out. Clara, she had bought a bunch of stuff from like an auction sale from the magician's like closet. They just, I guess, were selling stuff for charity. And she was very kind and sent me one of the jackets they wear in Fillory. So I just had it, and it's like very like looks like a cosplay, something I could wear to a Ren fair, but I like love it, and it is hanging up on the back of my door, and I'm like, I treasure it. It's not comfortable. I was like, oh, maybe I'll start wearing this around the house. It is not comfortable to wear around the house. But I love that I have this like thick brown jacket that looks like I belong, like sitting behind Margot and Elliot. Anyway, I almost spoiled something. I almost said a spoiler.
Yep, I almost said it too.
It's so hard.
It's so hard. Fuck. So yes, we are here to talk episode 2. We open on kind of like the aftermath of the beast's attack. Yeah, I thought they did a good job with that, with the flashes. I really liked the fact that it was like Quentin was like kind of there, but like still like thinking about what happened, because in a lot of, I mean, this is why we all love Buffy too, right? Though this show does, I think it always does a good job of like showing that this is traumatic shit that happens to them, right?
Oh yeah, it doesn't brush it aside. It doesn't go, okay, well this happened and now we're doing this. It's like, oh, this really fucked up thing happened and it's going to continue to affect everyone who is involved with it.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, I don't know. Meredith, what do you, I feel like that's like up your alley too, right?
Oh, I just loved, first of all, how these people get so much into one episode, I will never know. I mean, this show, I think, is the most densely packed show I can think of that I've ever watched. And I, even just watching that first episode and the second, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I know all these things and it's only episode 2. So it's like these shortcuts that they take of like, bad thing happened. Let's remind you, we can have these traumatic flashbacks and like moving on. We're like, but it's still all there. Like I was just overwhelmed that things I thought had taken place over 6 episodes were in one.
Yes. Yeah. We said this before recording, but I think all of us kind of, Trevor, are you good with like, are you someone who I feel like remembers all the info, or are you kind of like me where it's like, I don't remember this, but sure.
When it comes to like Angel and Buffy, I remember everything. But these like magicians, even now, even I've seen it twice, which isn't comparable to how many times I've seen Buffy. Right. But I still like, I'm just like, oh shit! Like I'll still pick up things that, and I still have no idea what any of the story. Like literally, as I'm watching now, and I plan on just rewatching the whole series now again, I have no idea what any of it about. I know there's Fillory. I know there's there's monsters and magic and everything. I just don't remember like the details of why anything unfolds.
I do want to say something that is like my geographical thing with this, which is, so I live in Boston. And when you live in Boston for a long time, I'm not from here, like the way that Boston people like think about stars that are from here, because there probably just like aren't that many. It's like a Matt Damon, Ben Affleck world still in 2024 in this place. But I remember being obsessed with Anne Dudek, who is the professor, the teacher who starts this, and she is also from here. So often in my life, people will be like, oh, like, you know, Ben Affleck, Boston, you know, like the whole Departed situation. I'll be like, and Anne Dudek.
Yeah, don't forget. My first note for the episode was Amber from House with an exclamation point.
I forgot, and it was so like after, you know, you follow somebody's career who is sort of this character actress who shows up and doesn't, and I was like, oh, there she is. There's my girl. I was excited.
Yeah, and I had totally forgotten she was on the first season of the show. I can't remember how long she's on the show, but I had completely forgotten about her presence, and I was just like, oh, I love her.
I love her. So
I've rewatched the first 2 seasons. I've been doing like 1 through 3 on loop as background when I'm like sitting here at my desk, like sending y'all emails or whatever. So I'm like half paying attention. There are a lot of people like, I don't know who that actor is, but there are a lot of people like that I'm like, oh, right. One of the Real Housewives plays someone at the end of this season. The woman in all white with the black hair. She is a Real Housewife. And I was like, I kept looking at her face being like, where do I know this woman from? And then I looked her up and I was like, oh, she's one of the Real Housewives. And she's like one who has been an actor. She's like Kyle Richards, where she's like been in things before she was a housewife. But I was like, next time I talk to Summer, I got to ask her about like working with one of the Real Housewives.
Wow. I also just the context of seeing it and seeing it again so many years later, like what, I don't remember the exact year I watched this, but now at 46 years old in these opening scenes, I'm like, this is a very attractive Dean. Like Dean Fogg is like, I don't remember like even thinking about it then, but I'm like, oh no, or my point of view character is like a completely different. Yeah. I like have felt my age in these 2 episodes more than I ever have before, where I'm like, okay, hello. And I don't think I was thinking that then.
I did not remember that. We're talking about episode 2, so I can say this. I did not remember that the Dean loses his eyes at the end of episode 1.
Me neither.
And I was just like, holy fuck, this gets so intense so fucking fast.
In my head, that happened at like the end of the season. That was like a...
Yeah. I know we're not talking about episode 1, but I had like 1 or 2 notes that I just wanted to say. When they first introduced Quentin, I wrote down, Quentin looks like white Ian.
Well,
and then
keep going. I do have something to add to that.
Okay. And then when he's at the party and he's talking about like, oh, the Danish version, he's talking about Funny Games, right? The Michael Haneke movie.
Ooh,
he's got to be, because Michael Haneke remade his own movie. And it's funny because I disagree with Quentin. The American version is better.
I didn't realize
Michael Haneke agrees with me.
There's only been but there have been a few where the person got to remake their own movie. I didn't realize that was one of them. Huh.
Yep.
Because like there's that I forget the name of that horror movie that was like one of the first found footage movies ever, and then the guy was given a budget to remake the same movie and he named it something different. Yeah. I forget. Anyway, yes. The thing with this show is there's a lot of information, but it is okay for everyone who's like watching along. It is okay if you're kind of like, well, that left my brain, right? Like, I feel like when they're explaining things, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, mostly my whole vibe with it was at least for any of the listeners that are watching for the first time, is when I first watched this series, I did not pick up anything that they were laying down this first season. Like they gave so much information, and I was just like, that's a lot of words. That's a lot of made up words that I had no idea what you're talking about. And then by the end of the series, I kind of through context just kind of understood what was going on. And then when I rewatched it, I was like, oh, they're talking about those characters, and they're from this book, and then that guy is the guy who wrote this, and like it all just like makes so much sense once you have the end of series context, which is, it's fun that you get to rewatch and like get more information instead of just like, oh, I remember all this.
Trevor, I love that you're like, yeah, the second time I watched it, I got it. And I'm like, this is like my 5th watch. And I'm like, what?
What's going on?
But that's a good tip. Like, if people are starting now, like expect to just let it like roll over you. And
because I'm going to say this a lot. I have been trying my hardest to convince Zach and his husband, Alistair, to watch this show. And they were like, season 1. I'm like, no, but it gets so much better. I promise. But I do feel like now I do appreciate season 1, whereas I did not appreciate it like my first time around. It was kind of like but also Mae, to your point of Quentin, every time, like I know a lot of people watch the show and don't like Quentin. Like a friend of mine on Twitter, Taylor, is going through the show for the first time. I think he's in like season 3, and he's always like, I fucking hate Quentin. He's the worst character. And I'm like, but I relate to Quentin a little too much.
Yeah. I wish I was Alice, but there's way more of me in Quentin than Alice.
My best friend Kim and I always say we wish we were Margot and Elliot, but we're definitely more Quentin and Julia.
I mean, now you're making me wonder. I didn't want to admit that when one of the big barriers to my continuing was that I had a big Quentin problem. And I also was like confused about how was I supposed to feel about this person? And maybe in not liking him, I was not liking myself, because because of course watching this time around, I'm like, oh no, like no, I get it, and different times of life, but it took me a while. I mean, eventually I really clicked, but I think there were also, like, when you think about when the narrative came to be, like, I was sort of sick of who was sent. Like, I didn't know what metaphors they were going for, and I was sick of who got centered in stories. And I always think about, what our writer friend Sarah Farazana once said to me about, like, she always says, I don't really like these stories about wings and things. She says, because it's always some, like, white boy who gets a special privilege and gets special powers, and I'm not invited. And maybe that was how I felt in those first episodes in the first watch. And I think, it then things obviously open up so much more, and it's completely not that simple.
One of the things I wrote down was that I love that Quentin isn't Harry Potter. He's not like the chosen one. He's a part of something bigger, which, we kind of find out in this episode. Like, pieces are being navigated into place. We don't know exactly what's going on yet, but we get the idea that all of these people, all of these characters need each other, and they need to work together in order to do something. We don't know what yet, but it's really effective. And I think it's a nice subversion of that trope. It's not just, chosen white boy. It's like a group of chosen people who all have something different that they're bringing to the table and who all need each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think season 1, right, like the thing I give them a lot of, like, leeway with is it's the first season of a sci-fi show. I'm sure it was like, we have to make, like, the network won't take this show if it's, that diverse and centered around, like, women and queer people. So, because I do think by season 2, we start to get everyone else as the main character. Even by the end of this season, everyone, like, Margot and Elliot, I don't think they quite knew what to do with them at the start. But then by the end, they're more integrated and, like, more dynamic characters. And I guess, like, you want to play it more safe with like, I feel like a sci-fi show lasting 5 seasons is, like, bananas, right? Like,
yeah,
sci-fi was like, they were always trying, and the shows would look like, oh, maybe I'll give that a watch, but, like, I feel like they all lasted 1 or 2 seasons. And this one lasted 5, and there's a reason.
Got 3.
Did it get 3?
Killjoy's? Yeah, I think so. And I love that show. Speaking of wonderful queer content.
That was a show I always meant to watch. And literally, like, I think I was going to start it, and then I heard that it was canceled. And I was like, well, no, I don't want to start it.
I would still highly recommend it. Super queer, super fun, and just, like, very engrossing. And one of those shows where it's all those Canadian actors who are on, like, everything. And you're like, oh, I know her. Oh, I know him. Oh, I know them. It's great.
Before we continue, though, I forgot to ask you all an important question with your origin. Have you read the books?
No.
One. Just one.
Trevor?
No.
Okay. So whatever, but you also don't need to read the books, right? Like, it fully stands on its own. With apologies to Lev, read the books if you want to, but, like, it does, like, it's its own thing, which I really appreciate that they did take. I don't know. I know people get annoyed in an adaptation that's not, like, 1-for-1 sometimes. I feel like we live in that world where, like, people get so mad about that shit. Like, oh, this costume looks bad, or, oh, this isn't what they wore, and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, I appreciate Quentin is, like, the main character in the books. And like, most of these characters are characters. Margot's kind of like a combination of some characters. But I can appreciate that, where it's, like, different, but still, like, vaguely the same. Yeah, so we open on we open on, Quentin's having these flashbacks, and then we cut to Julia, and her and Pete arrive at this, like, meatpacking place. That's like we will then learn, this is where we first hear it, right? Yeah, because it's episode 2, the term hedge witch. Which, could one of you define what that is for me? I'm trying to, like, think of a good definition for that.
It's like a bootleg magician, it feels like to me. Like they can do magic, but they have to work really hard to figure out how to do it. And, like, not that they're less talented or capable, but they're the ones that were told you can't do this, so they had to seek other means to do it.
Yeah.
I kind of see it like Willow on Buffy. She taught herself magic. She honed these skills on her own. She figured it all out. She, Giles guided her a little bit, but she didn't have a real teacher. She wasn't getting an education in this. And I think that's the difference between students attending Brakebills and Hedge Witches. They're not doing it in a structured environment. They're not doing it under guidance of experts. It's like word of mouth. It's passing down magic as culture and tradition.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, they're like they're like the cool kids almost. Like they're like the ones that are doing it on their own, doing their own shit, and like not doing it by the book or by the rules.
Right. It's like they're the DIY punks of the music scene rather than the kids who are in orchestra.
That's a very good comparison.
I love it.
So we meet, Pete brings her into this little room where there's other hedge witches, and we meet Marina, who, again, she becomes a character that we know. I forgot she comes in this early on.
Same.
Because I didn't
remember.
Yes.
Like, I didn't remember, like, oh, is she pretending, or is she actually like not a full-fledged witch yet? I had no memory, and my friend Thea, who I watched it with, was sitting there just like
I was gonna say, I couldn't remember. I was like, wait, like I forgot that it was her like tricking, they were like tricking Julia. So I was like, wait, I thought when she was introduced she was like Estelle. Oh, I guess not. But then at least I kind of remembered it correctly. I also didn't recognize her at first. She looked so different than like what she will look like.
Yeah, when she's not dolled up like a badass bitch.
Yeah.
Yeah, she also does a great job carrying herself in a lesser way. Like she's kind of like hunched over shoulders and unsure of everything, and like letting Julia do everything, because obviously the test was for Julia, but like the way she performs the role to the way she snaps into being a boss the moment it's revealed is just like, oh shit, you're doing it.
Yeah.
Casey Roll is such a fantastic actor, and if you've watched Hannibal, you know that, and I
didn't know she was in Hannibal.
Oh yeah, she's a major character through the entire first season.
I did not know that.
Hannibal is one of my favorite shows. I've watched through it quite a few times, and I've watched all the episodes with commentary that have commentary, and it's just like I always describe it to people as the most beautiful and most grotesque show that has ever existed.
That's a show I've always meant to like watch. I feel like I watched the first 2 episodes when I was like hungover in my apartment in Brooklyn with my roommate.
Oh, that is not a good way to watch.
And it was just like too much all at once. And I realized they did like the whole first book in like 1 episode. And I was like, wait a minute, we feel like we're rushing things. And then once Gillian Anderson joined, I was like, maybe I'll go back to it. But then I just, there's always like 85 shows at once that you want to watch, and like, you got to pick one, right? At the Patreon Zoom we had this week, someone asked me, they're like, oh, are you getting all your friends to watch Magicians now? And I was like, maybe in like 20 years. I don't know. Like, I understand that like, if someone tells you a show is good, you like, you probably still have like 10 other shows you're trying to get to, right? I don't know if you all have this. Sometimes I'll have like, if I'm like, it's at night, if I'm a little stoned, I'm like working on shit, I will be like, oh, what's a new show I could start? But I don't want to start one that I know I have to fully pay attention to. So sometimes I choose for whatever's the one I don't care as much about, but is like feels easier, right?
Yeah.
What was that? Was it Willem Dafoe that had that quote recently about like, people are exhausted, and when they get home, they kind of want to turn their brain off. And like, he wasn't incorrect. Post credits, we go back to Brakebills. I kind of love seeing them all recollect what happened. I do love Katie and Penny being like the badasses, like kind of saving everyone. And like a thing I do like that we show here very quickly. So, I mean, to mention that it's not Harry Potter, which it was billed as when it was coming out, like, oh, adult Harry Potter. And I think it's so much more than that. Is here they're like, well, that's the magic that kills people. You're not allowed to use it, blah, 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 blah. And then like they also, it's like later when Elliot's like, oh, please, an incident happens here once every few months. Like, that's what it is at magic school. And it's like, yes, that makes more sense. Like,
Yeah.
and I do like that even, Katie's like, I know we're not supposed to use it, but like, fucking come on. Like,
Right.
kind of needed to use it here.
Also, to what Meredith had mentioned earlier, I do love that instead of just picking right up where we left off and showing the fight and then kind of brushing through the aftermath, they're like, let's sit in the aftermath, the trauma of what they're all going through, and then just flashback when necessary to show what they're talking about. I thought that was a really great mechanic, because it's like it could be one of two shows. It could be like, this is a really exciting magic explosion, which it eventually does become.
Yeah.
In conjunction with all the trauma and everything they go through. But like, they're establishing up front, like, we are going to focus on like these people and how they get through this. And then that's the backdrop, which I think is interesting.
I mean, to that point, that's exactly why, like, I can say, the plots I didn't always follow, but I had a good time, because it's like, I really cared. I mean, to do my Lost rant, which I do, I feel like every 5 episodes, Lost was always about the characters. I didn't care what they did at the end, because it was more about the characters, and the mystery was the backdrop. And like, I don't know, I feel like that's what makes me love a show, when we do have these like dire circumstances and cool things happening, but at the heart of it, it's like, you care about these characters. And I don't know. And Mae, as another horror expert, don't you feel like the show does blend horror well?
Yeah, absolutely. It injects these little elements of horror in sometimes subversive and sometimes overt ways.
Yeah.
It never feels like a straight up horror television show. And there are parts that are so anxiety inducing and so genuinely terrifying. And sometimes they're just in these small little pockets, and other times it's like a whole episode, which, I know we'll talk about episode 4 when we get to it, but that's a sci-fi trope. It's also a horror trope. They do that on Buffy, and it's very effective. It's very effective at blending all of these genre elements together into something that feels seamless and unique.
Yeah, that's a lot more eloquent way to put it. Yes, I agree with that. I tweeted about how like, we're starting recording for the Magicians, and I said like, anyone who likes supernatural or horror or like sci-fi or fantasy, like, it kind of blends all of those things. Yeah. But yeah, so we get the teacher. Is the teacher the person you were talking about, Meredith? The teacher who tells. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so she tells them, they're going to find out who did the spell. I forget. How is it they realize a spell did this?
They have ways of like tracing magic. That's how she finds the book out in the woods. Oh shit. Is that this episode or episode 3?
No, that's
they find it in this episode.
That's
this episode. Okay, right.
Okay. Sorry. Because I
all
watched
collectively forget, like, wait, what happened to this episode?
Yeah. They have ways of tracing magic. They have ways of identifying, like, okay, here are the residual energy patterns of this magic, so it helps them narrow down what exactly was done. Yeah. That's what I've always gotten from it.
I mean, that's yeah. I can buy that. I'm like, do I remember that? I don't know, but sure, that sounds correct. Because I know she does say like, we will find out who did it, and we will expel whoever did it. So then we see, Quentin is kind of freaking out. And before we like go back to Quentin, we cut to, Julia and Marina, I forgot to mention they got locked in the meat locker. Yeah. Julia's saying she hates hazing rituals. Julia, like, I do feel bad for her. Later at the end, she says like she's tired of proving herself. And we're in episode 2 and she's saying this, and I agree with her, right? I'm like, I also don't think you should be continuing having to prove yourself. Like,
yeah.
And it's only episode 2.
Julia.
I mean, Julia makes some selfish decisions, and she's making them from a place of desperation.
And like, whomst among us,
Yeah.
Right.
It's I loved in these episodes, and this part I did not remember, of just this idea of once you know something exists, do you want it to be taken away from you? In that first episode, I was thinking like maybe I'd just be like, wipe me, my friends. Like I like this idea of knowing something you can't hold on to, and how I loved in this episode how she speaks of Brakebills. Like she really like the Yale of this, right?
Yeah.
And she is still so being affected by belonging, and how in both of these systems, like when we were talking about what is a hedge witch, I'm thinking like the examples of people we've seen in both types of societies are still being controlled and exploited and helped in both positive and negative ways by the leadership of those groups, right? Like we see it with Julia, like the way it's so harsh and upsetting, and it's locked in a meat locker, and yet you get the sense at Brakebills that it's like this is university problems on a different like I watching it this time, I was delighted to see that it starts off as a critique of all of this is really complicated to navigate for all of these people, like who's doing it right.
And I know, like, we're talking about a magic school, but, like, that feels more realistic, right?
Yeah.
Like, I realize that's a ridiculous thing to say about a magic school, but, like, the inner workings would be really fucking complicated, right?
Yes.
Like, I worked at a regular non-magic college, and I'm like, oh, all these emails I gotta send are complicated. Oh, I gotta log in again. How do I remember my password? You know what? What we're going to do is we're going to talk about the Julia of it all.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
That's good.
Julia and Marina are locked in this meat locker. They find a dead body. The dead body, then when the dead body got up, I was like, wait, is this a golem? But it's not. It's just Pete doing the dead body. And so, that was pretty...
zombie, just add ice.
Yeah. I did like the horror of that, like the dead body getting up and then the dead body fucking chasing Julia like around this meat locker. And I like that Pete was just like, I'm tired of waiting. That's why I want to speed this up. And I feel like the like conceit of it being magic doesn't solve all problems is kind of like, I don't know, it does seem like, that is kind of important for them to all know that like, sometimes you just like, get a screwdriver and do the thing, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It's very Buffy telling Dawn, like, the whole point is to run, right? What episode is that where Buffy's like, no, sometimes you just run the fuck away? Yeah, is it no, it's not Spiral, is it?
No.
Well, whatever. But yes, it is like, and I feel like that's not a thing that a lot of genre shows do, right? Like, if there's the power, sometimes we'll have the like depowered episode or whatever. But I like that.
I was gonna say, speaking of Buffy, it reminded me of Helpless also, in that like doing a test and being like, let's see what you can do without your powers. And also like without the consent of the person realizing that's what the test is for. Like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And she rants that she's tired of proving herself. And I'm just like, girl, you have every right to be pissed about this. I would be fucking pissed too. Like, so I feel like you're right, Trevor. That would, if they were like, we are going to do, you get locked in a meat locker and there's a test to get out.
Yeah.
All right.
Shows the, fine.
Like, it would still be shitty, but like, it's like, all right, well, she did agree to it. So, okay. But yeah.
Yeah, and don't tell me, because obviously we want to stay spoiler free. I don't remember if we find out there's a reason later on that they rejected Julia from Brakebills, but my fucking heart broke for her.
I know.
And I hate that. Like, she's obviously a talented witch. Let her learn.
It just reminded me of like that, like when I was younger, like my SATs were just never going to hit it. Like they just weren't like, where I'm like, I think I can do some stuff, but there's this system that they're testing with and I just cannot add and subtract. And I think I can get through life without this. But that moment, and it's so, you can tell that it is so devastating for someone so smart and ambitious and, prolific and to have to decide whether, this definition of mediocrity is something she's open to. And even knowing that this other version of a life, if she was eternal sunshine, that she'd probably thrive in as well. And it was complicated to watch it this time around, where I thought, what are we fighting for here? And
I think it's another element too that's makes The Magician such a rewatchable show, at least for if you do it twice, because it's such a sad story, and it's still sad also the second time through, but Julia's story and everybody else's story has so much more context to it that when you watch it a second time and you understand everything that's going on behind the scenes and with everything else that's going to happen in the story, it just like, it's like watching a whole other show where you're just like, oh, this character's doing this because of this, and this, as opposed to just like, I don't know. It's a really fascinating. I don't think I've ever seen a show that had that kind of rewatchability where you kind of get two different experiences.
Yeah. And like it, while it is crowded, it doesn't feel too crowded, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
I don't really know how to explain that because I can't say there's not a lot of characters, just there are so many characters. But of like our core group, it's like we check in on all of them enough that like I feels like they are all characters. They're not just like a background, right?
Yeah, the show is very well balanced in
Yeah.
terms of both characters and storytelling. It never feels rushed. It never feels overcrowded. It's like you were saying, Meredith, they fit so much into these episodes, and yet it works.
Yeah. So yeah, Julia kind of like, it was her hazing ritual, and like that's kind of how she like gets in with them, right? Like that's how she becomes officially a hedge witch. Which did make me think, because I have called, like when I'll like on social media be like, oh, my favorite witches, I always have Margot in there. And I have had a few people be like, well, is she technically a witch? And I'm like, that is true. Like on the show, like the hedge witches are a separate thing, but it's still kind of the same, right? They all do the same shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Meredith, what?
That's a really, I'm making a confused
I saw you,
face.
yeah.
I'm like, I've never asked myself that question of who's a witch and who isn't, and now you broke my brain. So I don't know.
Fair enough. But she becomes a hedge witch. Yeah. And then so back at Brakebills, we get, Quentin is really worried about getting expelled. This is like his life. Alice doesn't seem as pressed though, right?
Yeah, but don't we find out from Alice we find out from Alice later when she talks to Margot that she just kind of broke in there anyway.
Yeah.
So she's not as
Right.
excited about being at Brakebills anyway. So she's just like, whatever, I'll find another way in here. Like she's determined.
Alice was like Elle Woods, where she's like, what? Like, it's hard. I just stole a key and broke in.
Right.
I love the dynamic between Alice and Margot, and I love, so, I don't think I mentioned this because Cordelia wasn't really in the episode we talked about of Buffy, but my friend Thea, who I have a lot of friends who are therapists. Thea is a social worker, and she and I have this theory that Cordelia is high-functioning autistic, really good at masking. And we kind of think the same thing about Margot. She's very direct. She very much speaks her mind, and she's still a very emotional person. She just, sometimes social cues for her don't work the same way they do for more neurotypical people or people who are not on the spectrum. And so she's being so genuine with Alice. And like, even if her tone comes across a little sassy, she does actually want to be Alice's friend. She also wants the hot tea for gossip, but that's not her only motivation.
You are right. Both can be true, right? You can both like gossip and care about the person you're talking to.
Right.
I was going to ask how you all read that. And it's funny, Mae, you said that Ryan, our other co-host, does usually say that she feels Cordelia and Anya like read as autistic, and she's autistic.
Mm-hmm.
And I have had a few people say that to me. And I mean, Summer has said this on the podcast covering Angel, how much it's clear that Margot is like, I feel like, and a little bit of a spoiler, but Margot gets more fleshed out. And that Margot is kind of like Cordelia, if Cordelia had been allowed to thrive and maybe written by a queer person / woman, not a man who was mad at her. Because I do feel like they are very much alike. They kind of have similar journeys. I don't know. She gets fleshed. Is that a spoiler? That's kind of a spoiler, right?
No,
Well, I think I don't know.
It's good for
Okay.
them. Honestly, I think that's another example of like the benefit rewatching this show as well, where when I first watched, I didn't necessarily read Margot as anything more than just kind of the not mean girl, but like just throwing jabs out there. And then if she pretty quickly becomes like, she's my favorite character of Magicians, hands down, but she pretty quickly becomes like a fully fleshed out like character who's incredible. And then rewatching these scenes, you see it coming through Summer's performance, or you see all the like the way she just the subtle shift in her face when Alice walks out of the room. Like when I first watched it, I was like, oh, whatever, she doesn't care. But like when I second watched, I was like, oh my God, I see it now. Like I see everything that she's doing is so great.
Also, there's this thing with Margot that I thought about watching this, that like, what if Cordelia had been loved by anyone appropriately? Like we meet Cordelia and she's got a pack of mean girls that she's directing, but we never get the sense that she's actually seen, at least in the beginning, until she is truly seen. And right off the bat, Margot has this partner in this experience. Even just to be loved like that seems to make her far more vulnerable, where it's not just I'm here for the dirt, it's also I'm here. And it makes me that much more sad for Cordelia that that's a character that comes from a household that maybe isn't loving her the way they should, and friends, it's like Margot isn't just defense mechanisms.
Yes.
She's so much more than that, right from episode, 1 on.
Yeah, that's right. What if Cordelia had her own Elliot?
Yeah.
Amazing. Who would have been Cordelia's Elliot? Like, I'm like,
Dennis the Ghost. That's who would have been her Elliot.
Yes.
I always am like, Dennis should have been queer because it would be a queer man who like worships her. And like, I feel like, I mean, he couldn't talk to just a ghost, but I feel like if they had like Cordelia would make sense with like having queer friends, right? Like she would be the straight girl at the gay bar that's like cool, not the annoying one who's like, oh, gay people, but like she would be like the one that can hang. She would also be the one that's like, I got coke, you want to go to the bathroom?
Yeah, and just that they like have built their, I mean, I don't want to skip to the end, but there's the end of this episode is poetry to me for that reason of just like, this is where the love is. Like this is
and I will say, and I have told Summer this a zillion times, I feel like I've never seen the gay guy, straight girl, best friendship done as well as it is done here. The two of them are like immediately, like in the first season, I don't know if they say how long they've known each other, but like you can tell they're also getting closer. They're already close, but they're like also getting closer. And it's really nice to see like, I don't know. I guess for me, I'm like, oh, an angsty gay guy who's always depressed and like likes to dress a little like silly. Oh, I can relate. Like, oh, I feel seen. I'm not nearly as cool as Elliot, but like, because I've had a few people say they didn't like that Elliot's more depressed since he's like the one like out gay character. But I don't know. I like that he's allowed to be.
It feels authentic.
Yeah.
And also, can I just say, Thea and I were talking while we were watching, and I was like, I don't know if I've ever wanted to fuck a character more than I want to fuck Elliot. Like, oh my God. And I'm like 95% a lesbian, but he's so beautiful. Yes. And I feel like he would definitely be really good in bed. And I want to feel that.
I feel like he definitely lays it down. Yes.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, so I do like the like cute detail of Elliot walking in the physical kid's cottage and him saying, Avada Kedavra, get out. And they're all like,
oh my God, it's so funny.
Yeah. Like I love that their reaction is to like be annoyed at him and they're like, all right, we'll leave. Like I don't know if you all caught, Margot says to Alice, like, I have a perfect dress to like bring about those assets you're hiding under that tent.
Well, I noticed it also because she's like, Alice is wearing that white sweater, and I felt bad because I noticed I was like, look at that sweater. And then Margot almost immediately says, like, you've got assets. And I was like, yes, I have just seen, there's,
noticed them.
Well, and that's where I'm like, oh, I kind of wish I was Alice, except like, I like showing these off. You know what I mean? Like, before we recorded, Ian, you said, like, hey, can we go on video? I was like, oh, let me put on makeup. But the first thing I did was put on a bra that makes my kids look good.
So, Elliot and it's just like such a like whatever line, but then Elliot takes Quentin to get a drink. And I do like, no spoilers, but I think Elliot and Quentin and Margot and Alice in their like separate scenes pretty much immediately have like there's chemistry there, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I love that Margot and Elliot have this super close relationship and they just immediately embrace, they try to embrace Alice. She's a bit resistant to it, but they immediately embrace Quentin. Yeah. They're not like, oh, he's a nerd. Oh, he's annoying. They're like, nope, you're one of us now. We adore you. And I love that vulnerable moment that Elliot has with him where he talks about killing his bully. Yeah. And I can't even imagine how fucking cathartic that would have been.
It's like cathartic, but also it's like I feel like it would be both, where it's like, but then you're like, oh, I did murder someone. Fuck. Like,
yeah, it's again holding that dialectic. You are like, oh, I killed my bully, and I am a murderer.
Like, oops, I also
time for therapy.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's separate these things.
You see, I'm magic, and
I loved that story about what he's talking about eating his feelings. Like the whole it felt just really from start to finish, and the delivery of it, I was like, whew, I had forgotten this. And again, knowing what we know, but it's such a great introduction to like this person.
Again, to compare it to Buffy, which I feel like we're going to do a zillion times throughout this coverage, but I feel like another place where it's like, oh, if these actors weren't so good, this wouldn't like work as well. Like it doesn't come off as melodramatic because of his Elliot kind of like monotone like delivery of the whole thing, where like a little bit changes in his voice. I feel like that acting choice is like a really good choice for him to tell this like traumatic story of like, that's how I found out I was telekinetic. Like I feel like, I don't know, it's so good.
He's so incredible and capable of just like taking you through. He's able to take you through either a dark idea or a sad moment and then just like hiccup with a joke and keep going. And like, it's just, he has this really good flow to the way he delivers everything. I love him so much.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we get the Margot and Alice scene. I know I read a lot into things. I felt like I was like, I kind of want them to kiss. Like, do they like, it felt like they were flirting, or that Margot was flirting with her, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah. I think she was, honestly. Yeah. I think she was like, let me be a source of comfort. Let me show you that, yes, I want to be here for you. Let me get that hot goss. And also maybe let's make out.
Yeah. Right?
And the scene ended and Thea and I both went, now kith.
Right? I never noticed that before, but watching this scene, I was a little bit like, because like, Margot, like I feel like she is the straight person that also like will like dabble, right? Like that's what she comes off to me, like she'll dabble.
She would put hetero flexible in her dating profile, which I fucking hate. But if Margot did it, it would be okay.
It's okay if Margot does it. Because I never, in my brain, I like remembered the scene as, I agree with you, Mae, because I remembered the scene as like Margot being shitty to Alice, but it's just, her tone is not, it's not there, but I feel like she meant it when she's like, what, I want to be your friend.
Right.
And then like Alice just leaves, and it's like Alice gets scared and assumes Margot is like being an asshole, but Margot's just like, hey, let's gossip on my bed and like, let me like borrow my clothes.
Let me give you a back rub.
Yeah. We get Quentin and Alice they're in the school, and it is lit beautifully, like a Riverdale scene, but like a less tacky Riverdale. I love the like red with the bat. It's like red light in behind Alice. It looks great. Which I gotta mention, I do think the cinematography in the show is really good. Like
always.
Yes.
It's like like a sci-fi show budget can't possibly be that high, and like I feel like they did like absolutely the most with the budget they had, right?
Yeah, I think besides the cast being amazing and the writers being amazing, the whole crew is fantastic. The sound design and especially the sound mixing on the show is wonderful. It does not have that problem that a lot of shows have now where the dialogue is super quiet and then the sound effects are way too loud. And it's like, yes, dynamics are good. It's important to have those. And like, I'm an audiophile. I have a 5.1 system. I, have it set up
I
properly.
don't even know what that means.
I'll tell you later.
Okay.
But a lot of people are watching this stuff on their computers or on TVs, and the way they mix the sound in newer shows, it's like you're going to blow the fucking speakers when you turn it up for the dialogue and then a loud sound effect happens. So I really appreciate that they don't do that shit on this show.
Also, so far, and I say this as someone who is one of those people that's like, why can't I see anything? You've spent all this money on all these effects and I can't see anything. And all of these shows, so far, I can see everything. Like the lighting is such that even when you're trapped in a meat locker and it can be very almost like you're in the shadows of that, I'm never like, wait, is this my TV? And I say this without any knowledge of how anything works. I just notice when I'm like, I can tell what's happening is expensive and you clearly don't want me to see it. And I think they bypass that beautifully. It's actually quite bright.
Yeah. It's like, you're right. Even in the scenes where it's like dark, you could still clearly see everyone, which I love Stranger Things, but like, oh boy, that last season, which I adored, when they were in the Upside Down, I'd be like, what's happening?
Yeah.
Who am I looking
is that? Right,
Yeah.
I'm like squinting, like
is that
totally.
person
It's
dead or just sitting down? Like,
yeah.
And it really is what you said, Meredith. It's like, they spent so much money on this, and like, I can't tell shit. Like,
Yeah, and that I guess it's like the style of, well, things must be spooky and cool if it's really dark. And this show proves that things can be really bright to the eyes, especially later, and still be super freaky.
Yeah. We just covered The Descent on the Lady Killers, and that's one of the things that I talked about, is that you can see things
That's a good
clearly
example.
in that movie. And like, okay, it's a little brighter than it would actually be in the cave, but they do that so
but it's a
that
movie. Yeah.
you can actually see what's happening. And I appreciate that so much. I do think I'm happy for the lighting in that. I wish the aesthetic was a little fuzzier. I was saying on the episode, like, I kind of wish they had set it in the 80s and almost made it a found footage film.
Yeah.
So you'd have that like fuzzy VHS aesthetic. Although lugging around a home video camera from the 80s would not have worked in those caves.
No.
But did anyone see the live act? This is off topic, but the live action Little Mermaid.
I did not.
No.
So I did go with a friend who was really desperate to go, and we went, and I was like, you got to be kidding me, because they actually, to me, it looked like, well, what would it look like underwater, really, if there's only just the sunlight coming? As it turns out, you can't see it. I'm like,
you can't see shit.
Right. I was like, this is so authentic to how light moves underwater, but also just let me see the dancing crab.
To go off that, Meredith, I remember Twitter, this was so annoying because there was someone who genuinely wasn't trying to be like, a black woman, blah, blah, blah. It was like, the movie in the trailer looks way too dark. And everyone being like, that's what it would fucking look like underwater. And it's like, yeah, but I'm not. It's still a movie. There's not a real mermaid underwater. Like,
yeah, I was like,
how dare you, Ian?
I really, right. And I enjoyed especially her performance. I was like, what an incredible thing. Just turn up the dimmer.
Yeah.
So we get Quentin brings Alice, and this is where we get a big info dump of the Chatwins. Can anyone properly explain it? Because I cannot.
Essentially, the Chatwins were a real group of children who are all related. They were it's kind of a cross between C.S. Lewis writing the Narnia books and Lewis Carroll writing Alice in Wonderland, because Lewis Carroll was actually friends with a young girl and he based Alice on her. So it's a cross-pollination of those two real life situations. So this author, whose name I can't remember, he wrote the Fillory and Further books that were supposedly just inspired by these three adventurous children that he knew. And we come to learn on the show, like, oh, Fillory's real. They were actually doing these things. They were actually having these adventures. But essentially, they did all three of them vanish? I can't remember exactly what it.
It's like
what
within
it
the
was.
same year, right? Yeah.
Right. And, we saw the Fillory clock in the first episode when Quentin went for his grad school interview. And that was kind of a first hint, like, oh, maybe this shit is real. And then in this episode, we kind of get confirmation of that. And like all the Fillory stuff and the way they're presenting it at first is so creepy. It's so creepy. And it's like, Quentin loves this world. He's obsessed with it. And I don't think he expected it to feel so unsettling.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really glad it's not, but I feel like, I mean, I don't know much about C.S. Lewis or like, I don't know much about them, but I'm so glad that it is not like they didn't lean into the Harry Potter of it all and make the author be the author of Harry Potter. Like I not even because I hate J.K. Rowling now, but just because like that would have felt a little too reductive at the time. And I feel like it was smarter to be like, no, we're going to not go for the obvious reference. We're going to go for like an older reference, not to like hit you on the nose with what like, oh, magic school.
Yeah.
Well, also like, and first of all, isn't the author, is it Lev? And it looked like him in that, right?
Yes.
In the, I think that's a cameo, right? Where he's like an expert or something. But also like, I assume he's maybe older than me. I don't know what his age is, but like,
I think he's around our age. Yeah.
So, right. So like, I feel like he's referencing probably his, like it would have been Narnia for people for when he's writing that book.
He's older. He's 54.
Okay.
54.
Yeah.
But when he was writing this, like I get, certainly Harry Potter and all that, but I just feel like it would be something from childhood that is, if it's going to be older, like I love that it's, and also there's just like, I love the Narnia of it all and the Alice in Wonderland. It's just, because, and I can see it, right? Which now you read those books as an adult, the politics and all these other things. But when my sister read it to me as a kid, I was like, take me to Tumnus. That's the end of it. And I wasn't thinking about anything else.
Right.
But yeah, I wanted to point out, yes, Meredith, that is Lev Grossman. So the video they're watching about the authors of the book, he plays like the expert talking about like the history of the book, and it is Lev Grossman, which is a fun cameo. And I'm wondering, I was like, I definitely didn't realize this the first time, so I don't think I really knew what he looked like. I'm wondering if there are any other like little like cameos from him on like screens or something. So he shows her all of this. We learn they all disappear. God, I wish I could give a better. We learn a lot of things. The kids disappeared. And so then we get Penny and Katie. Penny, I will say, is a character. Penny and Katie, both it took me a little longer to warm up to as characters. Because whereas I know Quentin can annoy people with like being too angsty and sad, Penny's too angsty and like but angsty in a bully way. Yeah. Like, and so that makes me not like
the way he treats Quentin right off the bat. And like, he's hot and he's charismatic and, he obviously has issues from being, as he would hate to be called, psychic and being able to hear people's thoughts telepathically. I can imagine that would get fucking old. And especially if you're around someone like Quentin who has a decent amount of emotional intelligence, but very low emotional control. I can understand why he would be driven a little crazy by him.
Yeah.
I just feel like there are healthier and more effective ways to communicate with someone in your life like that than being a fucking dick to them.
Yes. So we get, which will be a long-standing thing, at least for this season. Penny and Katie are being kind of angsty at each other, right? It is wild that this is already happening in episode 2. Katie's like, well, if you're gonna leave, we might as well fuck. It's like, good for her.
I want to fuck in midair.
Yeah.
I mean, I honestly, when I first watched the first episode and it happened in the next scene, I was like, oh shit, that's so fast. That came out of nowhere.
Right. Is this when Quentin and Alice find Penny and Katie? Yeah, right. And then Quentin's all like, we gotta talk. And then that teacher comes up to them and is like, look what I found.
Look what I found buried in the woods.
How the fuck does she find that buried in the woods?
Again, traces of magic.
Magic,
That
yeah,
book
sure.
is what they used to do the spell, so they were able to trace the residual energy from that classroom out into the woods where Alice buried it, which you would think, as essentially the Hermione proxy on the show, you'd think she would have known better.
Yeah.
Mm.
But I feel like with Alice, it goes a little like the Hermione of it all kind of like ebbs and flows, right? Where sometimes it's like
Yes.
really there, and then sometimes it's like, wouldn't she be better at this?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Alice,
No.
similarly to Quentin, is an extremely emotional person,
That's
and
true.
her spikes and her highs and lows, I would say, are even more intense than Quentin's are. And so when she's at her like almost manic state where she is so hyper focused on something and she doesn't realize how wrapped up in her emotion she is, she gets sloppy.
Yeah, that's fair. I never thought about that, but yeah, Quentin and Alice both kind of are almost in a bad way, like matched equally with like how emotional they are.
Yep.
Because I don't know that I could ever be with someone as emotional as I am. They'd have to be like a little calmer because what are we going to do then? So then Professor Sunderland is her name, and she interviews them all. And basically, it's like they're all kind of telling a different story, right? Except for Penny, who is like tells the truth, right?
Mhm.
Supposedly,
yeah. And so then like Quentin, what is it? Does he call Julia?
Yeah, so he calls her from a payphone and leaves her a voicemail. I wrote in my notes, voicemail, how novel. And
I left Meredith a voicemail recently, and she was like, "This feels so old school, Ian."
yeah, he leaves her this long, desperate message. He sort of kind of tries to apologize for being an asshole about her getting rejected from Brakebills. It's not a very heartfelt or authentic apology. He's just saying it because he's panicking and he doesn't
Right.
want to end up in the same position as her.
Yeah.
And then the voicemail prompt cuts him off and it's like, press 1 to save your message, press whatever to delete, and he deletes it. And it's just like, ugh, come on. At least fucking commit to communicating with your friend.
Yeah. I remember because when in episode 1, when he was addicted to Julia, I was like, that was the beginning of me not liking Quentin. And it took a while for me to warm up to him. Now I like him from the beginning, and I know, especially with where everything goes, I'm like, I understand why everybody's doing everything. But I was so annoyed with his smugness and just like, well, you're just, like, and his trust in the system. It was so gross too, where he was just like, well, they had, they would know. And I'm like, you just started there. What are you talking about? You just found out this existed. And so when he made this phone call, I had joy. I wasn't like, oh, he's apologizing. Yay. It was more just like, yeah, motherfucker. It sucks, doesn't it? Like,
Yeah, cry.
Yeah.
Crying right now
Cry
because-
about it.
Yeah.
I think
Because-
we skipped the part where Katie steals stuff from the physical cottage.
She gets an amulet and a book, right?
Yeah,
And we don't know what they're for, right?
correct.
Okay. And so the other thing I forgot to mention is they are saying they're going to wipe Quentin's mind, right? That's the end of that is then that's why he's freaking out because he does not want that to happen. And that is what happened to Julia.
And then there's the part where we see Katie get into the car with Marina and Pete and give them the book.
Right.
Oh, wait, before the phone call though, is the scene between Elliot and Quentin, right?
I don't remember.
Yes, you're right. You're right. Yes,
Yeah.
you're right. Yeah.
I just because I wrote down in my notes, and this I'm gonna not spoil it at all, but I just wanted to say his line of saying, "I bond fast, time is an illusion, life retains a spark," and then talks about seducing him and showing him that life retains a sparkle for decades. Like almost made me fall out of my chair. Like, it was one of those rewatching moments where I was just like, ah.
I had the same where I was like, and we won't talk about it, but I was like, oh my God.
Oh my God. He said the thing about a thing.
The thing I also
if someone said that to me, I would just be like,
I gotta say, the Elliot and Quentin always felt very true to how I was around straight guys I had crushes on, especially, I mean, probably still how I am now at 41, but especially in my like early 20s and like undergrad, definitely reads very that to me, but also it's not, I don't know, but also it reads like Elliot's not just like, oh, I'm going to try to fuck you. It's like, oh, I think you're cute, but also I do care, right? Like that's how it reads to me, and I like that. But yeah, and I think Elliot's the one that tells him they're going to wipe his mind. Quentin and Penny have their fight. Penny says he just told the truth, not all of it. He tries to use the battle magic on Penny, throwing Quentin across the park. They both get sent to the infirmary.
Well, and the reason it doesn't work is because Penny has that amulet in his pocket.
Right.
But I do love that we are shown that even though Quentin is not particularly extraordinary, he is a fast learner who pays attention, because he knows how to throw that battle magic from remembering Katie's hand motions.
Yeah.
That's true,
When she threw it at the beast. And I love that. I love that they show that quick little flash of him remembering it, and then he just does it.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah. And then what is it? That night, Quentin sneaks over to Penny's bed and like takes the amulet from under his hand or whatever. Which, so is that not the same amulet that Katie gave to? It is or isn't?
Yeah. No. She did not give it to them, and Marina was pissed off that she didn't give it to them. She says the guy I was with pocketed it.
Yeah.
Okay. Right.
Because that was the main thing Marina wanted.
Yeah.
Okay. And then like later that night, Quentin reports to a professor's office and finds Eliza, who had been the paramedic earlier. She says she was there to make sure he got to Brakebills. Now she is the specialist who is there to wipe his memory. If I recall, this is
who the dean had a meeting with at the very beginning of the first episode.
This is why I started to be like, are these different people? And I'm combining them, because then I was like, is she also a filler? Like she's a lot of people.
She's a lot of people.
Well, and we'll find out more about who she is coming up, but we're not going to talk about that yet.
Because she was also the paramedic that took the body that they found in episode 1, isn't she? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That gave him the book.
Right. But yeah, Meredith, same, because I'm like, they need to explicitly tell me these things, otherwise my brain is like, she just looks like this other woman we saw. And what is it? She's a specialist. He asked why she gave him the 6th book to Fillory. She just is like, oh, I thought you'd like it. She doesn't wipe his mind and tells Quentin he's a better liar than expected, which is good.
Yeah.
Smart, but not a genius.
Yeah, I wanted to point out, that's one of the things that I really loved in this scene that I think also hooked me, was that she straight up is like, you're not Harry Potter, you're not incredible, you're not amazing. Like it just kind of set the path of like, we're not following the chosen white guy who's like got all this power. Like and she's even confused. She's like, for some reason you're wrapped up in this. We don't know why. So you can hang around a bit, but if you fuck up again, you're out. Like, I really dig that.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know, this is going to be really specific, but also vague. There's, I forget the name of the book. I want to say the author's last name is Hess, maybe. It's a YA book, and it's all about like, kind of like the kids that would have been at school that weren't friends with Buffy if they went to Sunnydale. And it's like the kids that are like not the extraordinary kids living in this world where like an apocalypse can happen and there's other people that have to do something about it. And I always do find that interesting. And I feel like this is an even more interesting take of like, they have powers, but they're not, like you said, quote unquote, the chosen one. But like, they all do have power. So like, they can all do shit. And I love Elliot saying earlier, like, please, an incident like this happens like every few months at this school, because fucking of course it does. Like,
it's just kids doing magic.
Yeah. Like if I was 19 and had fucking magic, I would be reckless now, but especially at 19. God, I would have been a nightmare.
They're mid-20s, right? Because this is like instead of grad school.
I wasn't sure if it was grad school or undergrad. I couldn't remember. I knew they were
because Quentin had a quote-unquote grad school interview, and it was actually set up to be an interview for Brakebills. He just didn't know it. So I think they're mostly catching kids who are graduating from undergrad.
That makes sense.
And like, yeah, imagine being like a horny, still pretty hormonal mid-20s person who all of a sudden has this power. Like, no wonder they have parties all the time.
Yeah. It would be like if any of us, like, at 23, suddenly fucking Giles comes and he's like, hey, do you want to come to Sunnydale? It is real. You can hang out with Buffy. And I'd be like, what the fuck? Like, and they would all hate me because I would be so annoying. And I'd be like, oh my God, Buffy, your hair looks great today. Oh my God, Willow, what spell are you doing? Like, be like, can we not invite him over again? Like,
you'd be like the unsubtle version of, oh my God, what's her name? The new Slayer in the audiobook.
oh yeah, Layla?
Indira.
Indira. Layla.
Indira. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you'd be like the unsubtle version of Indira.
Yes. So then what is it like? I guess it's just what you said, right, Trevor? They kind of just are like, she's kind of just like, just don't fuck up again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what is it that the dream he had of Fillory she had as well? And that she said she's seen the beast before, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and she also says something about the garden path, and he's like, the garden path. And she's like, don't look for connections everywhere.
Yeah.
Which feels kind of like a pretend I didn't say that type of thing.
she's laying out cookie crumbs and like, just ignore those.
And she respects that he has the amulet, right? Because she, like, but she takes it from him, doesn't she?
Yeah.
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 And she's going to tell the school to give him another chance. She then goes to see Dean Fogg, who is lying with bandages over his eyes. There are magical boxes in his hand. She says she knew he'd come, just not so soon. And he says, no one is ready. Quentin, Penny, they're not built for this.
Right.
Find the beast, kill him. And she says it's not that easy.
I love his line. I can't remember if he says it or if Eliza says it. All we can do is make them magicians.
Mm.
It's such a good line because it's like, we don't control their destiny. All we can do is give them the tools and hope that they figure this shit out so that they can survive.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I just really do like how, again, I know this sounds stupid, but how like more realistic this feels of like students at a magic school than like, ooh, you are the only one who can do this thing and blah, blah, blah. And like, I don't know, it's kind of like a theme throughout the show, right? They kind of do, it's like, these are just magicians doing their shit. Like they're trying their best, and like sometimes it fucks up, sometimes it goes well. And I think that's what I love about the show so much is they are, you know, there's been like a thing on like, I feel like especially on Twitter where like everyone wants every character to be like 100% no flaws. And I love characters with flaws. I love characters who can be selfish, make bad decisions, maybe not do the best, whatever. I don't know. That always appeals to me.
And you still feel for them. You can still sympathize or even empathize with them because they feel real. They feel human. We all fuck up.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I think also, one of the things that I love about it too is it's all so messy. Like the way the show unfolds feels so realistic to life in that like characters will die or not be in relationships or be in complicated, like everything just kind of happens and it's all over the place. It's not just like, oh, this is in the season 1, this is the arc of this relationship and they break up at the finale. And then in season 2, they start dating. It's all just kind of like flows like real life. I truly dig the way I have no memory of what exists in what season because it all just kind of like is this big floating orb.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed.
And they make a good case in terms of that, the dense parts of the episode where like, if you center it on anybody in particular by the end of episode 2, they've made a case for anyone to be the protagonist.
Yeah.
That, you know, even with Alice, like you kind of get this like little bit of, for Margot, like Nepo baby magic in the family thing. And then you realize this is like kind of a curse and not good. And everybody has reason to be like the hero and of this story and the person we're rooting for. And it's a lot with that many people to pull off even the dean. Like by the end, you're like, okay, what's going on here?
We're going with him. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point. But all right, so we are at the end of favorite scene. Trevor?
I think it's the scene between Elliot and Quentin. after Quentin finds out he's going to get erased.
Mae?
I think it's the scene between Quentin and Eliza. I love it. I love how playful it is. I love the back and forth banter. I love that she's giving him some answers and being encouraging, but not too encouraging. She's not giving him too many answers because she's like, I don't know if it's an intentional withholding or more just knowing, like, you got to figure it out yourself. I cannot give you all of these answers. But that moment when she is so impressed that he had the amulet in his pocket to prevent his mind from being erased, it's so wonderful. And I love that he's like, oh shit, I got caught.
Meredith?
So my real answer would be the Elliot Quentin scene, but I will say as a rewatch answer, it is Quentin returning to the house and seeing his new friends there and realizing he can stay. And it very much reminded me tonally of the end of The Wish, where you see all of these people don't know this thing that happened, and they play like very cheesy music at the end of that episode, right? It's like Willow and Xander and Buffy sort of being like, and it's like this like after school special. But there was something about him being like, and I get to continue the journey we've started together, viewer. And I just had a nice moment.
Yeah.
Mine is the Elliot Quentin moment as well, because Trevor and I are the same girl sometimes, a lot of times.
We truly are.
Which I said to Mae as well the other day, because also.
Yeah, you were like, are we the same day?
Favorite outfit, Meredith?
I need you all to look back at the Alice sweater that comes right before that Margot offering a different, because I would argue that it is quite flattering.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Mae?
I love Marina's outfit when we see her in the car after the freezer test, but honestly, it's Katie's like the like hooded long thing with the slit around her belly button. And it's like, I love that she's, even though she's a, slimmer woman, you see a little bit of tummy, and it's just like, I love that. I love that they're not trying to cover that up.
Yeah.
And just that long garment with her shorts, she's so cute. And I can't remember if we get any queerness out of Katie, but she is very, very lesbian coded. And I love that about her. Katie is definitely the one of all of them that I would be like, will you be my girlfriend?
Can you hit me once, please?
oh no, more than once.
I do agree with you. And I feel like also the confidence to be able to, like you said, she is very slim. It's not like but the confidence to be like, yeah, that's okay. Like I always, because I don't have that confidence. So like I appreciate when someone else does. Trevor, how about you?
I would say it is Margot's outfit in the final scene, that like rainbow skirt with the blue top, and then the fact that I feel like the umbrella is part of the outfit. Like she's just like put on her outfit, and she's like, I have to carry this umbrella around with me now. It's so great.
I think I do like that Margot outfit, but Meredith, I actually put down Alice's outfit, that gray sweater with the black skirt.
Is it gray? Yeah, it's really, I was like Googling, like, where can I buy?
I do think sometimes it was harder probably to dress Alice because she is so slim and she is, endowed.
Buxom.
Yeah, chest-wise. But I kind of liked those, like, the Peter Pan collar. I think she wears a lot of Peter Pan collars, and I think they always look fucking cute on her. Like, always. In the first episode, she has the black dress with it, and this she has, like, the gray. Is gray or blue? What color would you say it is, Meredith? Is it like...
it's light. It's a light color, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, and like it's like a light charcoal.
Yeah, and like that feels very Alice's vibe. So yeah, I like that. What grade do we give this episode, Trevor?
A B+.
Okay. Mae.
I'm gonna give it an A-. I think it's really hard sometimes to have a second episode of a show that doesn't slump at all. And I think they did a really good job, especially with the very intense way the first episode ends on kind of a cliffhanger. You have no idea what the fuck is going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And like we talked about at the top, I love how it opens with the bits of flashback mixed with like what's currently happening. It's very effective. And I love that it goes all of these different directions, but I never feel lost.
Meredith?
I'm going to give it a B+, and I think it's so much better on a rewatch, but I think there is a balance issue in the beginning of the season with where we are with Julia, and where, it's a lot of introduction, and sometimes I wonder, like, would they have been better off leaving us on a cliffhanger with her and giving us a third episode that's all her. I don't know what the right writer response is, but I found myself in the freezer moments wishing I were in the place I just found. And it's the balance is really hard, and they do an incredible job getting so much in, but sometimes like knowing what's to come, I'm still going in the B's for that.
I agree with you, Meredith. I'm going to be the harshest grader. I give it a C+. I do think it's like I do think it's just a lot of info in this episode that like I still couldn't fucking follow. And there's not a lot of the hedge witch stuff is like the action, I guess, right? Because we get like the dead body and they're trying to get out of a meat locker. But like I do think the show balances it really well, but like I do agree with you, Meredith, at the top they do have a little bit of trouble balancing it, because I also just don't care as much about the head witch stuff. But it's not because it's not like interesting or cool, but it's like the Brakebills is more fun, and this is more like, I mean, it's all grayscale, it's all like blue, and it's like, I don't know, and there's so many characters in the hedge witch stuff that are like faceless, nameless, and don't matter, but there's still a lot of them there. Like when they walk into that room and meet Marina, there's like, like 6 other people in the room. And I'm like, all right, but do I need to know all these people? And I couldn't even answer you the question for that because I don't remember if I do need to know them or not. But yeah, so C+, but that's still not, there's nothing wrong with a C. That's okay, as I tell my students.
Passing.
I'm still passing.
Try to tell that to Kim.
But thank you for doing this with me. Thank you all for listening. I love covering the show. If you liked Slayerfest, you can subscribe to our Patreon, where you get a lot of bonus content. I have an interview I did with Summer Bishel from like 2 years ago, where you can listen to her talk about the Magicians. We do Patreon Zooms, watch-alongs, and a bunch of other shit. We're going through Buffy Season 3 for the 25th anniversary, episode by episode over there. And any and all support is much appreciated. If you want to find us on social, we are at SlayerFestX98. If you want to find me, I'm at Ian Carlos. And you can subscribe to us on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. May, where can everyone find you?
You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Letterboxd at EversonPoe. That's EversonPoe. You can find my music on Bandcamp and streaming platforms. I am Everson Poe, 2 words. You can hear me hosting and editing the Lady Killers podcast on Bloody Disgusting Podcast Network. We had a whole set of episodes for February themed around bad romance, including Jennifer's Body. I'm seeing Lisa Frankenstein tonight on a second date with someone. I'm so fucking excited. And yeah, I added a bunch of other podcasts too, but you don't need to know about that.
Meredith, where can everyone find you?
I host the Love Letters podcast for the Boston Globe about people's relationships, and they tell me stories. And there's an Ian episode that is good. So if you look for it, it will make you laugh and cry and love Ian even more if that's possible. If it's possible, I don't know if it's possible, but
yeah, I don't know if that's even possible.
Exactly, and yeah. So
listen, as a Quentin in real life, who it's nice to hear all this love. Trevor, where can everyone find you and your things?
All my things. I co-host a podcast called Another Buffy Podcast with Kristen, and you can find that wherever you do podcasts. I also do Lego animations of popular shows like Buffy, The Magicians, Angel, Community, all the things. You can find me on Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, all the things at Trevor Carlee. It's the same everywhere. That's where I am.
All right, everyone. Well, we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.